I'm Alana, and my pronouns are they and them.
And I'm Jessie. My pronouns are she and her.
And
we're making mentions. Making Mentions is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Hi, everyone. Today we are talking to Chaia. Chaia is a Jewish dance music artist who makes Kleztronica. Kleztronica is electronic and techno music that uses samples from Yiddish and klezmer music. Chaia has her first single coming out on September 13th, which hopefully is when you're listening to this episode. And we are so excited to talk with her about her music and her journey to this single that's coming out. Chaia, could you tell us what brought you to making Kleztronica?
So I grew up in a Jewish household. My dad's a Jewish studies teacher, and there were always sort of these different cantors and Jewish musicians coming in and out of the house. And we were very involved in our Jewish community here in New York. And I started to meet people who were interested in Jewish music, who made Yiddish music, specifically Basia Schechter, who sings in Yiddish and became my mentor when I was a little kid. She taught me about Yiddish music. She taught me what Yiddish is. And I became interested in it. And that further deepened for me when I saw someone playing accordion on the subway, and I started to play accordion and joined klezmer bands and played in klezmer bands for all of high school. There was a parallel line in my life where I was starting to become interested in electronic music. I listened to the radio a lot as a kid, and I heard a lot of different sounds coming out that I knew couldn't be made by instruments that I was familiar with. And I started asking more and more questions and eventually downloaded electronic music production software. However, I felt a lot more at home in the Jewish world than in the electronic music world, at least at first. The Jewish music world was very welcoming, and for me, the electronic music world felt very male and a little bit inaccessible. I applied for school to study klezmer at the New England Conservatory, which has a very amazing and well-known klezmer program. And it was there that I started to meet a lot of queer people, a lot of non-cis men, and a lot of people of color who were making electronic music in big and expansive ways. I started going to these raves by this collective called Clear the Floor, who make Black and Indigenous techno and house music. And that collective taught me about the radical history of rave music, of techno, of house, rooted in Black American diaspora and liberation. I started to see parallels in the music to klezmer music as a sort of traditional art form, as an art form that honored ancestors, as an art form where sampling, where direct lineage was important. And the more I saw parallels, the more I saw how this music could be applied as a liberatory vehicle for my own culture and tradition. Techno and house is very rooted in this idea of community, of solidarity, of mutual protection, of the underground as a safe space. And I saw the ways in which my community needed that, especially in the diaspora. So I started sampling Yiddish music into this house and techno medium and bringing it into club spaces and trying to create safe, queer spaces, safe Jewish spaces, safe spaces of solidarity between Jewish culture and other cultures in this underground club space with the history of house and techno behind me.
Wow, that's incredible to get all that context as well. Like, I really appreciate that you not only delved into like your personal journey into it, but also the context in which like techno music, electronic music is rooted really, and what you've been able to discover in that community. I want to take us back a little bit though to talk about the roots you were talking about in your personal journey. And maybe I'm looking at the question we had, but also reflecting on how Kleztronica is specifically informed by Judaism. And I guess that could be culture, but what I'm also thinking about is how music, especially Kleztronica, can help us deepen our connections to Judaism. And that can be culturally, religiously, I don't know, in a lot of different ways. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, Kleztronica is most obviously rooted in Yiddish culture and tradition, and that's primarily a secular Yiddish culture. So, history that's basically rooted in this organization called the Bund, the Yiddish Bund, in Eastern Europe, which is all about how secular Yiddish culture can serve as a vehicle of solidarity. A lot of klezmer and Yiddish musicians are also involved in the Reconstructionist movement, which is Judaism as civilization. It's all about how Judaism is something that's in every level of our lives. It's how we walk down the street. It's how we walk into a room. It's the food we eat. It's the music we play. And I think that is really ubiquitous in the Yiddish community, this idea of how is Judaism our civilization and how does Yiddish our civilization and our practice and who we are. And I think Kleztronica is the same thing. So how do we enter a club space? We enter it as a Yiddish person. And what would that mean? Oh, our samples are all Yiddish. Oh, we serve pickles at Kleztronica events. It's down to the very minutia of what this space is, how it functions, what kind of dances are people doing, how are people existing in the space, how are people talking in the space. But I also think there's something for me that's a little bit different from the stuff I've learned from Yiddish culture. My dad's a Jewish studies teacher. I said his specialty is Kabbalah. He teaches Zohar and Lurianic Kabbalah. And I grew up really with way more of this sort of Aramaic mystical tradition than I grew up with Yiddish. Yiddish was not sort of a central part of my life growing up in this way, besides interacting with Basia and all these sort of fringe things. Um, my main connection to Judaism as a child was through my dad and through Zohar and Kabbalah. Um, and I think that has worked its way into Kleztronica just because it's so much a part of who I am. So I think that there's a big thing about techno where mystical traditions are attracted to it because it's all about the trance. It's all about how do I exist in this room for 14 hours and maintain my focus and feel present in my body and feel connected spiritually. And it's also about the connection between the spiritual and the intellectual and the roots. And I think so much of that is present in Zohar and in Judaism more broadly. Um, for me personally, I incorporate a lot of mystical elements about Yiddish into the music. So I do this song called Zu Wemmen, which in Yiddish means to who, but it's basically a Kabbalistic incantation song that's in alphabetical order, and you describe all these attributes of God, and it's all about sort of working yourself into a trance. Um, I also am really attracted to Yiddish songs that touch on mysticism and mystical mythology. We talk a lot in Yiddish culture about the golden peacock, the Gilden Apave, which is this mystical figure that flies all around the world carrying Yiddish culture within it. And I'm really attracted to both that and also religious references in Yiddish songs. And I think that has become more common in Yiddish culture in the recent years, but this kind of Yiddish secular movement of whose lineage I'm really a part of didn't include that historically. So I think it is special to Kleztronica spaces.
I think it's really interesting that growing up, your connection to Judaism was grounded in a lot of Jewish mysticism. I feel like that's not a super common experience for a lot of American Jews. Um, I know that I didn't know anything about Jewish mysticism until I was like unpacking Judaism for myself as an adult. I'm curious if like having the focus of Judaism look a little bit different for you impacted your values around Zionism at all and how anti-Zionism shows up in your work today.
I am so lucky to have this amazing father, Nathaniel Berman, check him out, who grew up modern Orthodox, but left it and then really made his Judaism for himself. So from the moment I was born, basically, he always said to me, there's not one Judaism. If someone tells you Jews believe X, that's not true. He said, there are thousands and thousands of Judaisms. It's a long, long tradition, and there are so many of them. And it's up to you to pick your favorite things and pick what you want to highlight and your lived experience of that. Every week, he would ask me, what shul do you want to go to? And because we live on the Upper West Side, there was like 30. And so I would always pick, and then he would take me to whatever shul I wanted to go to. And so we ended up going to Haredi shuls, to Jewish renewal shuls, to conservative shuls, to Reconstructionists, to modern Orthodox, and everything in between, because it was always a choose your own adventure type of thing. For me, that also meant that Judaism always felt like pulling at threads and finding the threads that were most beautiful and most important to me. I grew up with a lot of Zionism. I went to a Jewish day school. I was in mainstream Jewish spaces. And it always seemed to me to not be the thing that I found to be beautiful. It didn't reflect the values that I cared about, the values of love, the values of anti-hierarchy, the values of uniqueness, and sort of Judaism as something that is beyond boundaries of Western imperialism. It was so amazing to me when I discovered Yiddish as a vehicle for radical diaspora and Yiddish's long tradition of anti-Zionism. And when I began discovering songs that written even as early as the turn of the century about anti-Zionism in a secular Yiddish way, not just because the Messiah hasn't come yet, but also because we want to stand in solidarity with communities around us. And I knew that that was a thread that I wanted to highlight, especially because the more I learned about Yiddish, the more I learned about the ways in which Yiddish had been marginalized throughout the 20th century. I felt that it was particularly important to uplift these traditions of radical diaspora, of anti-Zionism, because they weren't the traditions that were mainstream that I had grown up around, and they were traditions that really deserved to see the light of day. And I so admired the folks that were already doing that work, like my mentor, Henke Snetsky. And I wanted to join them and be in community with them. And this was both a Jewish community that I really resonated with and Jewish thought that I really resonated with. So it's beautiful to find myself here.
Thank you again for walking us through your Jewish roots in another way. I really appreciate hearing how your upbringing could be both very spiritually fulfilling and very spiritually not fulfilling at the same time in certain periods. And I want to take us now a little bit back into your journey, but from the techno side, how did your passion for techno come about? I'm just so curious, yeah, like where that began.
I was listening to this interview with Juan Atkins the other day. He's sort of one of the godfathers of techno, though really I see it sort of as rooted in Jamaica and dub and Lee Scratch Perry, but Juan Atkins, Detroit techno godfather, he was talking about the four on the floor, the sort of this repetitive beat that's in techno, that's in house, that allows these different tracks to come together in such a seamless, beautiful way. You basically have 4 kicks per measure. So a kick is the thing that sounds like boom. So you get the sound that goes boom, 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 boom. And every measure is just boom, 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 no matter what else is going on. So it might be boom, chop, boom, chop, boom, chop, boom, chop, or it might be boom, 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 boom. But because you have this regularity of the beat, you get a lot more freedom to do other things. I almost started making techno by accident. I was fooling around in my computer. I didn't really know about techno, but the 4 on the floor is so beautiful because it leaves space for everything else. When you have an then everything can just sort of float around it and weave around it in this beautiful, infinite way. I read this piece by DeForest Brown Jr. about how the 4 on the floor was a way of making society make sense for Black communities in Detroit and Chicago, and how in this, he compared, it was really beautiful because he compared it to redlining and all these districts that were drawn in such fucked up ways to prevent Black people from voting, and that the 4 on the floor, in a world that would do anything and bend over backwards to make Black communities disenfranchised, the four on the floor was something that made sense. It happens every beat. It's always spaced the same way. You can count on the four on the floor. You can depend on the four on the floor. You can dance to the four on the floor forever. And then weave your own self into that. And that was really inspiring to me. And I learned all this after I was already making four on the floor music. And I think similarly with the samples, the four on the floor leaves space for the samples to basically do anything. Any of these Yiddish samples, they all fit with the four on the floor because it's a loving beat. The four on the floor is a loving, it's a stable beat. And so it's very easy for me to take these samples from the Ruth Rubin archive and from the Yiddish Song of the Week archive, that's Itzik Gottesman's archive, and to introduce them to the four on the floor, which gives them a little oomph and gives them a little love. And I think we have parallels to that in klezmer, these dances that are very regular and they're always the same. The hora will always be bum, 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 bum. And the freilach will always be bum, 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 bum. And the Bulgar will always be bum, 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 bum. And within them, so much can happen in terms of melody. And the melodies can do basically anything. And you listen to these Brandwein and these terrace melodies, and they jump and they glide over the beat in such interesting and sort of fucked up ways. It's really, really beautiful. And similarly with the samples, they all take different spots in the four on the floor and they find their way beautifully into it.
I'm curious what it's like to sample archival music, like what the process is like. So like how do you find the music? Like how does it get sampled? Like what makes you pick a certain song? And also like how is that different from sampling non-archival music?
There's a lot of different things that go into picking a sample. One thing that I'm so grateful for is the fact that these archives are organized so beautifully. So the two archives I'm using, one is organized by Ruth Rubin, who is an amazing Yiddish folklorist and archivist, and she basically labeled everything. She collected 2,500 Yiddish songs, or maybe closer to 3,000. I don't remember exactly right now, but she labeled everything based on where she recorded it, who it was that was singing it, and also what the song was about. So I can, in the archive, which is digitized thanks to a lot of amazing people at YIVO, including Eleanor Bazunski and so many amazing other people, I can click on a button that says the topic I want, and I get all the songs about that. So I can click Zionist and anti-Zionist songs, and I just click that, and I get a whole web page with all those songs. And it's just online and free, and it's amazing. Similarly, with Itzik Gottesman's archive, all the songs have a blog post that he wrote associated with it that goes into depth about what the song is, where it was recorded, all the different meanings of the songs, all the different versions that exist of the song, all the different books. He scanned all these different books where the song is present, and he uploads it to the archive. And I've talked to Itzik, I've talked to Eleanor a little bit, but Itzik is like, please just use this archive. We want it out there. This is all yours to use. It's just so beautiful because it's such a wealth of information that he has on there. And you can use this search function to search the archive for any word. So if I wanted to I'm doing a sukkah gig coming up. So I just searched sukkah. And I get these 4 amazing songs that are about sukkah. And one of them, it doesn't really even have sukkah in the name of the song, or it's like way down in the lyrics, but Itzik really expounded on it in the blog post. So it shows up for the search. So really, the first thing I do when I'm picking a sample is I'm trying to think about what I want to talk about and what I want to express in the moment. And that could be what mood I'm in, how I express my own emotions, but also politics or a holiday that's coming up. Or maybe I have a different recording, like in this single, a recording of my grandma, and I'm looking for stuff that's nice to pair with that. So I'm looking up that in the archive, and then I'm listening to the different singers. So at this point, I have singers that I know, that I love. Each of their voices I already know how to treat. So for example, there is Ethel Raim, who's an amazing Yiddish singer. She has a very particular style of voice, and her recordings are always sort of about the same level of quality. I have a chain for her in my computer, in my audio processing software, basically a chain of reverb of which part of the vocal I'm taking out. Maybe I'm taking out the low end. Maybe I'm adding a double. Maybe I'm adding an echo. I have a whole chain of effects, a list of effects that are already programmed as a setting on my computer under her name. So when I put the recording into my computer, I can type in Fagel, and all of a sudden, the whole chain that I use to process her gets put on her voice. Um, and then I obviously change it for each song, but it's really, in a way, it puts me into this beautiful relationship with her, that I have this special treatment for her, almost like if a friend comes visiting and they have a favorite snack. So I always know how I'm going to treat her, how I'm going to be in community, how I'm going to be in presence with her. And same for the other Yiddish singers that I love to sample: Bronya Sakina, Harry Ari, Licious Schechter Weidman, um, and many more. But I'm also looking for new ones to incorporate and integrate. Um, then after I put it in, I'm editing it to be regular. So a little bit. I try to leave a little bit of the eccentricities in there, but a lot of what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, she's singing this song and she's singing it sort of in a talking style. Ethel Raim talks a lot about the different ways of singing a Yiddish song. You could sing it sort of zugendik, just conversational. A lot of these songs are sung in that style, so you could have Fischlauch in Wasser, zij is veel besser, zij is niet geen Unterschied, bin kleiner bist du größer. And it doesn't really fit because she's not singing it to a beat. So I'll try to make it more regular so it really can fit. See how I can weave it into the 4-on-the-floor rhythm. Um, and I try to keep as much of that Zugendick in it as possible, while also making it really sound like she was just recording over this beat and she knew that this beat was coming all along. Um, and then I'll sometimes play my own chords over it to make it seem harmonically fit with the song. And I will repeat different sections to emphasize words. So there's this song that I work with a lot called A Neue Geschichte, which is a new story. And at the end, they basically say, lend your clothes to people who don't have clothes so that they can also mourn. And I think that's such a beautiful expression of solidarity and intimacy and community protection. And also right now we have a lot of mourning to do. So I make sure when I sample that, I repeat that line again and again, more and more. And I really want her to emphasize it in singing the song. So I'm sort of orchestrating them out over the beat. And then I'm playing it in nightclubs and seeing how it fits and how people respond to it. And if people, there's always at least one person who speaks Yiddish fluently at my concerts. So often I'm zeroing in on that person and I'm seeing, are they understanding it? Are they jiving with it? Do they feel like the meaning is settling for them? And I'll often talk to them after and ask them about that. And also for people who don't speak Yiddish, is the intention, is the tone of the song fitting? And then I'll go home and I'll edit it and see how it can fit better. And sometimes I'll pair it with a speaking sample from one of the Yiddish Book Center's interviews that are sort of about what is this song? Why is it important that we sing about this? So people can sort of understand in English if they don't speak Yiddish. And also if the people are alive who I'm sampling, like Ethel, or like Henke Snetsky, I'll ask them and I'll say, hey, what do you think about this setting? Do you feel like this expresses your intent? And see what they think about it.
Thank you so much. So I have listened to your single. When this comes out, everyone will be able to listen to it, which is great. But I had the pleasure of being able to listen to it early. And all of the things that you're talking about, like hearing you talk about them, I really can understand. I feel like the song better because I can see all those overlapping parts happen. Which is really cool because while I'm someone who's trying to learn a little bit of Yiddish, I don't know Yiddish. And I was really curious what made you choose the specific song that you sample in Borough Park. And it does feel so organic. In listening to it, it feels so seamless. I was listening to it and I played it for my partner and a friend we were with right after you sent it to me, and we were all just vibing so hard. We were like, wait, this goes so crazy. Like it felt really cool. And it felt really cool to like hear Yiddish words in that context, which is to me what felt really compelling was like hearing Yiddish words that like I don't know, Yiddish is a language like, my grandparents spoke it and I heard people speak it growing up and like I hear it being spoken in Jewish communities. Um, so to hear it within the context of techno music, which is a music that feels like more modern, I don't know why it feels so different. Like Yiddish feels so much more like distant to me than techno does. So to like have those worlds kind of combined uh was just really cool. And I was like, whoa, like this, like, I don't know, it feels like it's like for Jewish people, which was just really cool. Um, so that's me just gushing about the song.
First of all, that all means so much to me, and it's exactly what I want people to feel listening to it. I wanted to make a couple disclaimers, which is one, this song isn't really techno. It draws from a lot of this sort of timbral language and the rhythmic language of techno, but I think it fits more into the sort of house label. It's like, it's a house groove because it's slower and because of the way the kick and the hat respond to each other, but it draws on a lot of the timbral language of techno. And the second thing I wanted to say is that it was important to me that it felt really organic because I really want this music to not just be for Jewish people. I really want someone to hear it, and maybe if they speak Yiddish or if they're Jewish, they can resonate with it in that way. But I also wanted people to feel like this is a song that feels rooted, that feels like it has depth, that feels natural, that feels rich because of the samples, not in spite of it. And so I really wanted people from all backgrounds and also people from all different diasporas to connect and to say, this feels like music that's rooted. I have my own music that's rooted, and that's why I like this song.
Yeah. And I want to note that I think that's absolutely happening. My partner's not Jewish, and the other person that I was listening to the song with is also not Jewish. And so neither of them were like maybe vibing in the way that I was vibing because I was like, oh, this is Yiddish. But they were like, whoa, this is a really good song. And this just like sounds really good to listen to and like feels really good. So I think that's absolutely happening like with the single. Um, one of the really, really awesome parts of the single is that you're sampling your grandmother describing her childhood growing up in Borough Park. Um, and you mentioned that she has a very different experience growing up in Borough Park and that you really hope that her experience can be a model for communities that we want to build today. Can you share a little bit about what her experience was and how that has informed your dream of the future?
Something that was really striking about my childhood was that even though I didn't grow up Orthodox, I learned a lot about Orthodoxy from my dad. He was raised modern Orthodox in Queens and Forest Hills, and he went to Yeshiva of Flatbush. And it was really interesting for him to describe his Orthodoxy, and then I would experience Orthodoxy in the Orthodox communities that I was a part of growing up. Um, I also heard a lot about Orthodoxy from my grandmother and from my aunt. Something that was really interesting to me was that the yeshiva of Flatbush, they had these mixed dancing dances where people of all gender, I mean, there was a really strong gender binary, but people of all genders could dance together and interact together. So that was true when my aunt, who is a few years older than my dad, went to Yeshiva of Flatbush. And then by the time my dad went there, they took that out and they only did separate gender dancing. And for me, that was really interesting to hear because it was sort of a question about boundaries and what's okay and what's not okay. I think in a lot of Orthodox and modern Orthodox, but any kind of Orthodox community, there's a lot of conversations about this is what we do because this is the law. And this is what we do because this is the right thing. This is what is inscribed. This is just Torah Moshe Sinai. It's exactly the thing. And I think my dad introduced me to both a fluid way of living that and also a fluid history of Orthodoxy. for my grandma growing up, she grew up fairly strict. She grew up in Borough Park. Her family, it's unclear, but they were basically from a Hasidic lineage, we think, probably. And it was pretty strict. But she was able to operate in that in a very fluid way. And she grew up with mixed dancing, and she lived in Arizona for a while and is sort of vague about what kosher was even like there. And she says in one interview, I have the vaguest, my aunt was like, was there kosher meat? And she's like, I have a vague image of a cow. So it was like very like, it was people coming to this country, people were more flexible and making do and living in community with other Jewish people in different ways. I think throughout the course of the 20th century, there was an increasing separation between denominations, and there was increasing strictness and boundaries and insularity in different communities. I think that we see this also with sort of the way that funding got distributed. I grew up going to Limud, New York, which was an amazing conference in New York about Jewish culture. My dad taught there every year, so we went as a family. It was Jews from all different denominations. I learned about anti-Zionism there for the first time from Breaking the Silence, who came to give a speech. I learned about queer Yiddish from there and Yiddish, and there were people there who wore streimels on Shabbos and wore the sort of full black coat and hat. And they would let us as little kids like touch their streimels. And I learned about the history of the streimel and what does it mean to wear a streimel from that festival. That festival eventually lost funding, though actually as of this year, they're trying to come back. And I think one of the reasons is that festivals like that, so interdenominational, so boundary free, were sort of given up in favor of more denomination-based Judaism and also in favor of Zionists sending funding to Zionist organizations. So the diversity and the multiplicity and the fluidity of life in the diaspora was compromised by the nationalist project. My grandma was a Zionist. She grew up in the Zionist movement. She was very, very involved, but she lived a pre-Zionist life in many ways in the 30s, growing up in Borough Park. Partly because, yeah, it was pre-Holocaust and there was a lot less sort of fear around Jewish life and insularity. This song talks about her childhood and the mixed dancing that she did. And she would introduce it. She would say, this might shock you because this is unheard of today. Little did she know we like didn't observe Shabbos at all. But we did mixed dancing, but we partied, but we did this and that. And she presented this vision of community resilience and reliance and diversity that was really beautiful to me, and a sort of fluid orthodoxy that was very different than the orthodoxy I was surrounded by growing up. And in many ways, this is a love letter to her life and the parallels that I see between her life and the life that I experience throwing these Yiddish raves in Brooklyn with people of all different backgrounds and people who are sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of Satmar and the Haredi world, and people who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out of Judaism, people who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out of Yiddishkeit, people who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out of Zionism, exploring something new. The rave is sort of this radical equalizing space. The sample that I chose reflects this boundarylessness of my grandmother's childhood. It's the song called Oyfn Oyvn. A girl is sitting on an oven, a boy comes along, and basically they end up sort of a euphemism for them having sex on the oven. It's very, very cheeky, and my friends were telling me, friends of mine who grew up in Borough Park were telling me that they know this song now to very religious, very sort of strict lyrics, which is also really funny, a really beautiful representation. Something that I really like about the song that I only figured out after listening to it many, many times and hearing the lyrics is something that the girl says to the boy before he joins her. She says to him, I don't care about your background at all. and I'm not going to convince you to love me with my hands, with force. So she says, rather, I will convince you to stay with me, to fall in love with me, just with love and with care. And I think that that's really beautiful and something that reflected in my grandmother's childhood, this Judaism and Jewish experience of love, of acceptance, that's not tied to force, that's not tied to violence, that's tied to beautiful coexistence and sometimes cheeky coexistence. And this underground world of Jewish drag kings and all this sort of sexy burlesque and things that are beautiful and joyous and funny and sexy, and um the world that I see in my raves is reflected both in this song and in my grandmother's life.
That's so beautiful and, like, such a thread of Jewish continuity and change and, like, we're talking about the model for the future that is, like, deeply embedded and rooted in the past, and it's, like, bringing these threads through that have always been there. So tell us about right now, like, what brought you to this single release and this like, why now for this recording of this song, or why now for the release of your first single?
My grandmother passed away in 2018, and I've been sitting on this recording of hers and trying to figure out ways to honor her and to bring it to the world. I think it sort of just clicked for me now with this song. Another thing I've been doing all year while making this song is taking lessons with Ethel Raim, who sings the sample in the recording, and sort of getting to know her and getting to know her visions for Jewish life and Yiddish culture. Um, it's also, this is a moment of great cultural reckoning for a lot of people in the last sort of 15 years. There's been this resurgence in many ways of the 60s and 70s that originated the klezmer revival, because in the 60s and 70s, people all of a sudden said, we need to know our roots, we need to know our culture. And so there started to be all this different kinds of revival ethnic music, for lack of a better word, coming to light. Similarly, and accompanied by the protest movements, civil rights movements. Similarly, we see here George Floyd, 2020, all these different, and before that, radical climate movements and Extinction Rebellion, all these different forces coalescing into this cultural and political movement. I think my generation, Gen Z, is very, very political, and I remember just, yeah, going to protests in high school that were run by high schoolers was just a revelatory moment to me. And seeing people like Greta Thunberg, who's now an outspoken advocate for Palestine, shout out Greta, um, and just young people really coming forward in a way that I think has been absent maybe since the 80s, or since the 70s. Um, and accompanied by that is people really wanting to learn more about their culture and background, and a new era of cultural acceptance and acceptance of different kinds of cultural diversity that haven't been accepted before, and mainstreamifying of different cultural niches, and different cultural music. Like even in the top Billboard charts, there's such cultural specificity there. And I think similarly in techno, there's a resurgence. So techno, obviously, it started as Black traditional music, very, very specific. But now in the last 10 years, we're seeing a lot of the rise of different subgenres of techno that are cultural techno movements, like different kinds of Middle Eastern techno and Yemeni techno, Armenian techno, different kind of dance music that are culturally rooted. Me doing this Yiddish techno movement is really much very rooted in this kind of cultural resurgence. And this song is too. I think right now people are really ready for this kind of heightened level of cultural specificity, of roots, of acknowledging roots, of cultural specificity as a form of intercultural solidarity. I'm doing this event on Friday in honor of the single release with 6 different DJs from different cultural diasporas. Playing their very, very specific cultural music. And that for me is just the ideal form of what this music can be in community with these other cultural music collectives, really enacting through these raves this kind of active solidarity. And it's a fundraiser for DJs Against Apartheid, who's doing amazing advocacy work for Palestinian liberation. And it just shows how when we band together these 6 DJs from 6 different diasporas, Palestinian, Pakistani, Egyptian, Iraqi, Armenian, Kurdish, we can be a powerful force for direct financial support of these movements and emotional support of these movements and bringing cultural liberation into being and personal liberation and escape from Western violence into being through this direct solidarity.
Wow, this is truly beautiful. And perhaps you're already answering the second part of the question because you're putting it into action. But I was going to ask what dreams you have for the future of Kleztronica and your work. And this kind of sounds like you're embodying it already through this event and like the topics that you're engaging with through techno music. But what dreams do you have for Kleztronica?
I think this is threefold. The first part is just bringing this music more and more into the mainstream. I really want Yiddish music to have a mainstream platform for people to not say, what's Yiddish, but for people to know what Yiddish is and to have experienced this music and to say, oh, Yiddish, Kleztronica, of course. And it's already starting to happen a little bit, but I see it just more and more for Yiddish identity to have just as much of a or more of a platform as Zionist Jewish identity. So if you ask people, what's Zionism? People know. But if you ask people, what's Yiddish? People don't always know. And I want people to associate Jewishness with Yiddish just as much as they do with Zionism. And same goes for all the other cultures that were diminished by Zionism. I work a lot with a Ladino practitioner named Lily Henley, who's just an amazing person, and an Egyptian Jewish practitioner named Micah Simone, who's amazing. And all these different sort of marginalized Jewish cultures, I want them to be just as recognizable as Zionists and Israeli Jewish cultures. The second part is what I just talked about, cultural solidarity. And for basically all my shows to be like the event I'm doing Friday, to be direct cultural uplifting, direct mutual solidarity, direct liberation in intercultural conversation. And to incorporate more and more people into that and more specific cultural music, and to encourage everyone to make techno using samples, traditional samples and cultural samples. And then the third part is to just really enrich and deepen and delve into all the different things that Kleztronica can be. So one of the ways we've done this is by working directly with drag and burlesque practitioners and seeing how do drag and burlesque highlight a different part of Yiddish culture. So for those who don't know, drag is really, really old in Yiddish culture. And we have drag kings that go back to the turn of the century, like Pepi Littman, and the long history of Yiddish theater that's all about queerness. And I think having drag and burlesque practitioners in the conversation really serves to highlight this sort of untold part of Yiddish culture and history. The other thing I'm really excited about is a collaboration with Yiddish dancer Avia Moore, who's an amazing dancer and archivist and scholar of our scene and our time. I've been meeting with Avia over this year, and we're going to just continue to meet basically forever about how do we make this electronic music feel like it was meant for Yiddish dancing. So one of the things we've talked a lot about is how live musicians can respond to the dancers. And how do we do that for electronic music? So one option is we attach sensors to the dancers' feet that can directly control the tempo of the music. Or we have someone standing next to the DJ tapping, looking at the dancers and tapping the rhythms that they're making to totally control how the music sounds like. So this is an ongoing project and just part of a larger project of really enriching this music and building it fully out into a total musical culture that reflects the depth and the breadth of Yiddish culture as it exists today through this heightened specificity in all these different formats. So that's all three dreams.
It's really incredible to like hear you have such a clear vision of what you are hoping to come for Kleztronica and for like Yiddish culture more largely. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm in admiration of that. I think it can be really hard to like be very specific about like what we want to see to come. And it sounds like you're making those things happen. Like you have these ideas and you're like, yeah, these are my dreams for this. And like I'm already on the way to like making sure that they pan out. And I just think that's really special. And I'm excited to see what is to come for you and for your music. I know you mentioned your release show, this diasporic techno night, which is at Jupiter Disco. So if you happen to be listening to this Friday morning, tickets I think will still be on sale. And folks should go. But besides this show, are there any other upcoming shows or events that our listeners might want to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to shout out this show. It's going to be amazing. It's my favorite show that I've ever done. It's so many different practitioners. It's really the representation of everything I could ever wish for this music. And it's 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. So you just have to be free at some point during that time. Come through, come hang out. I would love to see you there. If it's an issue financially, just DM me or email me, or you can find me online. It's really easy. Find me and we'll make it work financially. And if you have accessibility need, I mean, we can just make it work because this is a really important show and I just want everyone to be able to see it if you're listening to this on Friday morning. I'm also coming to the West Coast next week, and I'm really excited about it. I'm doing a tour that's sponsored by the Workers Circle, who's an amazing, basically an extension of the Yiddish Bund that I was talking about before. And we're doing all these different West Coast cities and talking about the Workers Circle and playing Kleztronica and talking about utopian visions for a diasporic world. I'm playing in Seattle on the 18th, in Portland on the 19th. I'm teaching a workshop about cultural sampling also in Portland on the 21st. I'm playing a house show in Eugene, Oregon on the 21st. And then I'm probably playing in San Francisco on the 23rd, though details of that are still TBD. And then I'm playing in LA on the 24th and the 26th. The 26th is with two different organizations that I'm really excited about. The branch of the Worker Circle in LA, which is also called the SoCal Arbeiterring, which just means Worker Circle. And also Der Nister, an amazing Jewish bookstore / synagogue / Yiddish cultural hub in downtown LA, which is just such an amazing place and a really important part of my relationship to Yiddish. So we're doing that all in collaboration, hosted at the Workers Circle in LA on the 26th. That's sort of the headline show of the event. And then something that's really in line with my hopes for it becoming a more main stage thing is that I'm playing Pop Montreal, which is the big pop music festival in Montreal on the 28th. And for me, it's like Yiddish techno at Pop Montreal. It's like the total ideal of everything this music could become. So that's the 28th at Casa de Popola, which is an amazing venue. And then I basically have a break for October, though I'm playing a Sukkot show in New York with the neighborhood that's going to be amazing, and a couple of other things going on in October. I might be playing the shofar on the radio. It's all still TBD. But then, and obviously it's the high holidays. So, oh yeah, I'm doing Simchas Torah. I'm doing Kleztronica at Simchas Torah in DC on the whatever day that is, Thursday night. That's Simchas Torah. With the new synagogue project, who's an amazing thing. And then in November, I'm heading to Vienna for Klezmer Festival, which is an amazing festival, and doing a bunch of shows in Central Eastern Europe. So I'm doing an amazing project with this dancer, Eliana, a dancer aerialist person in Weimar, where we're going to do aerial circus and Kleztronica, all involved in these women mystical rituals of tying thread and burning wax and just all this amazing incantation work. And I think I'm doing a show in Lodz in Poland. And all of that is, I mean, that's still up in the air. So if you are in Central or Eastern Europe and you want me to come hang out, just DM me or email me because I'm still booking that tour. So please come come have me and let's play and hang out together. And then it's December and I'm doing a bunch of shows with my klezmer band called Leviosin. That's not electronic at all, but it's some similar type of Yiddish stuff. And then teaching Kleztronica at Yiddish New York, which is an amazing festival. Everyone should go to it. I'm teaching a class at Yiddish New York that I'm really excited about, where you basically everyone has a recorder or their phone, and you go around the festival and you record all these different people around the festival, and then we all remix it live and play it live. So that's going to be really, really fun. And we have a Kleztronica as the after party for that festival at Drum, which is an amazing venue in New York. And that basically takes me through the year. So that's what I have going on. Please come out. If you're in any of those cities, hit me up. We'll hang out.
I love that I was like, any upcoming shows? And you're like, yeah, actually I have 500 upcoming shows.
500.
No big deal. That's amazing. I was looking at your website and I was like, it can't be all of these shows. And yet it is. So if you're in any of these places, you should absolutely be going out to any of these shows or workshops. We will put a link in the show notes to Chaya's website that lists all of these events, and you can also follow her on Instagram, and she often posts about events that are happening. Um,
And if you're in any place that I didn't mention, please write to me, because like I'm always looking. I like love traveling. It's my favorite thing ever, is to just go around and play Kleztronica in different places. So please have me wherever you are. I would love to be in community with you.
This is the best and worst question of the whole night. And you can take a little bit to think about it. If you could leave our listeners with one message, what would it be?
I've talked a lot in this interview about intercultural solidarity. And I think my main message about why I do this work, why this is important, is all about safety. That our safety comes from these intercultural solidarity moments. Our safety comes from standing with others who are also part of marginalized groups. Our safety doesn't come from comparing ourselves to large Western nations like France or Spain or the US. Our safety comes from valuing our culture and our history and saying, hey, we're a minority group too, we're a marginalized group too, and as such, we have a responsibility to stand with other marginalized groups. We have some responsibilities to stand with Palestinian people, with Kurdish people, with Assyrian people. We need to stand with them and protect them, because protecting other groups is protecting ourselves. And it's all about mutual solidarity, mutual protection, mutual aid. And that's the most important thing, both as a Jewish person, but also as an artist and just as a person in the world for me.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really powerful note for us to end on. And I think that that really has shown through in our conversation today. I think like it's very easy to talk about the desire for solidarity and like building solidarity with other diasporic groups. Um, but I think it's a whole different story to actually be putting that into action. And I think that we are watching you do that, and I'm excited for everyone to join in and be able to experience it with you and listen to your wonderful new single. So thanks so much for being here today and talking to us about Kleztronica and your musical journey and your single Borough Park. We're so excited to see what's next. Thanks for listening to Making Menches. As an explicitly anti-Zionist grassroots org, we don't receive any institutional funding or support. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmenches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at makingmenches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Menches, the podcast, is produced by Alana Lipkin and Jesse Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jesse Sander.